And we should be live. Hello, everybody. Once more, back with the latest episode of Jack Daudible's Rook Club. And I am fantastically joined today with Lucas again from last week. Lucas, how you doing?
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure the stream is live, but hello.
It is. And then I'm also joined by my good friend, Emily. Emily, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are absolutely welcome. Emily has been a good friend in my Discord since like the pandemic for a good couple of years. And yeah, we've always been talking about fan fiction, writing, and she eagerly volunteered to come on to do a few readings for us, which is fantastic.
Yes, I volunteered my services.
You did indeed.
Yes.
In
Just forgive
reality,
me,
both
everyone.
of us were just enslaved to be here.
Enslaved.
Yeah,
Yes.
Jack threatened our lives.
Yeah, I got a notice on my door. Had to come or else.
I know where they
Same,
both.
actually.
I know where they both live. No, I don't really.
Yes.
I don't really.
Yes, you do.
Emily, just so everybody can get to know you a bit more, I suppose generally, what does Dragon Age mean to you? And that can take any form. If you want to talk for 2 hours on what Dragon Age means to you, you can, or short and sweet, whatever goes with the flow for you. What does Dragon Age mean to you?
Well, I will say it's sort of like a vessel for my creativity. It's a world I can get lost in. I mean, before taking up writing fan fiction for it, it was just the purpose of, drowning out the world and getting lost in something else and letting your mind breathe for a little bit. And then once I started writing, it became like a tool to where it's like a world I already know and familiar with, and then I can just write my own stories inside of it. It just excites me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
It's definitely like a hub. Even for me and Lucas, we did a flipping D&D campaign of it because it's such
That
a.
was lovely.
It was fun, wasn't it? It's a hub for so many different things, and it's really a franchise that you can get. I know that it's a generic thing, but you can get so lost in it. I know like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, people get really lost in those universes for good reason. But I would say there is no franchise besides Dragon Age for me where I get truly lost into the effect of Dragon Age. I love Lord of the Rings, love Star Wars, but for me, Dragon Age, it's fantasy, the level of writing there, how it flips kind of Tolkien tropes. For example, the dwarves compared to the dwarves in Tolkien. Again, they're good, but I love how Dragon Age flips things. But yeah, no, similar reasons to me really as well. But no, brilliant. I'm just taking a good sip of tea. But today, folks, we are jumping on the horror of Hormak, which I think has actually come... Well, it's obviously very relevant because of the... Well, I won't spoil too much for those who haven't read it. But the very nature on the Darkspawn, their future, kind of their evolved state, as well as a particular elven god, which was first hinted at. And I would say that previously, before Tevinter Nights came out, there was like indicators of, obviously we knew the Evanurus were going to return in some capacity, loosely based on Solas's statement in Trespasser, but we didn't know which ones in particular, and I would say this story is what set a lot of Gillinan theories in motion, particularly Tevinter Nights as a whole did with Strife and Irulen, who had Gillinan relations, but this story absolutely set up, okay, there's a lot of Gillinan shit going on, bearing in mind we know little of Gillinan, and like her allegiance to the elven gods was kind of she rose into it, whereas the others kind of were seemingly Mafal and Elganan's children. So yeah, there was a lot of ominous origin about Gillinan anyway, and it's just even further reiterated in this story. And now we spoilers, or kind of, we now know that that one of the antagonists of the Veilguard is Elganan herself. Sorry, yeah, it's Gillinan herself. Sorry,
All correct.
So yeah, there's a lot of ties into this that we'll be able to have fun discussions over at the end. But yeah, today we have Lucas doing the masculine voices for me. I think one of them is a monster.
Yes, I'll be voicing Ramesh and the other sort of meat monster thing that is apparently some warden.
Is it Grey Warden Jovis, but as a monster? His
Yes.
twisted, monstrous state. Eee.
Well, actually, well, spoilers, but yes.
Okay, yeah. Oops. And also, another thing that the story goes into is the Grey Wardens too and their future. And
That's the reason it is the best story in the book.
yeah. Oh well, I'm looking forward to hearing those thoughts at the end, Lucas. And then we have Emily doing the feminine voices for us today, which is Grey Warden Leisha or Lesha. And then is there another one as well?
Yes, it's Warden Recruit Friedel.
Friedel.
Did I
Brilliant.
say that? Friedel?
I
I'm
think
assuming it's
that's-
Friedel.
That sounds
it is.
good to me.
It's a German name. You did say that correctly.
Hey.
Oh, good. Yay.
Well
I
done.
succeeded at something today. Yay.
Nicely done.
So it's great to have two guests because it means I'm not going to be literally vomiting all these words at you, and I'm just doing that nice image in your head. It'll just be me being able to be the narrator, take it easy, and then have some good have these two in between. It'd be brilliant. Yeah, really cool, brilliant. Well, we will jump straight into this then, if there is nothing else to be said. Let us start Jack Daudible's Rook Club with The Horror of Hormak, written by John Epler, who is the creative designer of Dragon Age the Veilguard. So, let me just take a swig of tea before we jump into this. Has anybody else got any hot beverages, by the way? Or is it just me?
Nope.
I have
for
tea.
me.
I made tea. It's herbal tea because of my
Hey.
cold.
Yeah.
For me.
So
it's
sorry,
a-
everyone. I
it's
may have a
cold
raspy
drink.
voice.
Is it
cold
that
drink?
cold in England?
It's warm, but I'm British. I have to have tea.
It was 28 degrees here today. Actually,
fair-
30.
It was cold today, and I am drinking sleepy tea to kind of soothe my voice a bit. So it's not like Yorkshire tea with 3 sugars and milk in it.
I haven't been in a cold environment since like the weekend probably because yesterday I spent my entire I spent 2.5 hours at a fire in 30-degree heat. That was fun.
See, it sounds like you're actually getting a summer in Germany.
Well, you could say so, but it was also, a burning building.
Oh, okay, never mind then.
Oh, God. Oh, Lord. Well, it is sweltering here, that's for sure. But actually, it's only 83 today. Sorry, that's in Fahrenheit. I'm trying to think of what that is in.
83?
It's 83 in Fahrenheit here. We have a hurricane.
28.
Did you do that in your head, Lucas? Is that on the fly?
No, Google.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna say flipping heck.
I'm not that versed in Fahrenheit.
Virginia says, I really hope that somebody explains why the title says Hormak, but it's spelled Hormak. That's the first thing Lucas said.
Yep.
Brilliant.
The
Well,
question is,
There's obviously
which is
some
correct, Hormak or
inconsistencies
Hormok?
yeah. Is the title wrong or is the book wrong?
Anyway, let's get into it then.
Anyway, let's get into this. I have swug my tea. Okay. So, The Horror of Hormak by John Epler. The horses smelt it first. They were warden horses, raised around the fetid stench of darkspawn, trained from birth to tolerate their smell and to not spook as easily as most animals. They'd stood strong in the face of charging ogres on more than one occasion. But mere hours after entering the Navaran forest, the horses that Warden Ramesh's small party rode on began to stamp and whinny uneasily. Whinny, thank you. Horse expert right here. And whinny uneasily, clearly frightened.
Something's here they don't like.
Lesha looked wary. She was a Tevinter mage, confident to the point of cockiness, and not generally prone to fear.
Don't tell me you don't feel it. Something's wrong. The whole place feels broken.
She glanced at Ramesh and added,
I think that might be the disconnect she's referred to earlier.
oh, no worries. It is all good.
Well, let's just imagine that Lesha is thinking very hard.
Sorry. It's disconnected. I
It's
can
okay.
switch to a different computer if needed.
Oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. She's just glancing really hard and thinking.
All right. As I was saying, not even a full expeditionary group. Waiting for reinforcements.
Ramesh sighed and ran his hand through his hair. The hell of it was, he knew exactly what Lesha meant. The air was thick, almost suffocating. It pressed down on them, and there was an acrid quality to it that burned his lungs, though he could not identify exactly what it was. And she was right about the rules too. On a rescue mission, you always took more wardens than you had lost, ostensibly to carry out the living, but more practically so you could kill whatever the previous group had not managed to kill. Numbers helped on that front. But those rules had been written before Adamant, before Ostagar, when they still had the numbers to keep patrols wherever they were needed. Besides, Senior Warden Jovis's group was now 8 days overdue. Unnecessary risks were something Ramesh liked to take, but by the time reinforcements came, those 8 days would become 15. Add another 10 to make their way back out this far, and it'd be a month, at which point protocol was to treat them as dead. They could ill afford such losses. And the other reason, something unsaid, unfinished, between the two of them. Jovis had meant everything to Ramesh once, but he'd pulled away. Death walked with every warden, and you learned to bury grief beneath duty. Easier to do that, it seemed, before grief's edge had been honed by love and friendship. But regret had a weight of its own, and he wished he'd seen that sooner. He shook his head.
We press on. We're half a day's ride from where Jovis's mining expedition last reported from. Could be they're fine.
Ramesh added.
But until we get there, we won't know. And if they aren't fine, we turn back now. That's that.
Lesha inclined her head, accepting the gentle rebuke, but the expression of unease never left her face.
You hear me?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Understood, sir. Just feels something's wrong about these woods. Feels like the air hates me, wants me to die.
She shook her head.
I know, it doesn't make sense, but that's how I feel. I just don't like this.
Ramesh laid a gentle hand on her shoulder.
Me neither, but we've got a job to do. Misgivings will keep.
He hesitated, then added,
That said, one hand on your weapon, and eyes to the woods.
They rode on in silence. And Leash's expression of unease deepened, became grim. The air grew heavier, the trees thicker, and even the sounds of the wind through the trees became muted, as if the outside world wanted no more part of these woods. Sorry, my throat. It's that tea. It's cleared it, but it's got to me. 23 years Ramesh had been a warden. His calling was nearly upon him, and he'd been alone. If only he had felt the palpable sense of dread that filled the woods. He might have thought it was that. It reached every warden differently. But Lesha had only been a warden for 2. If she could feel it, if she sensed what Ramesh did, it was something real. They'd gone on another 7 miles down the muddy trail, when, without warning, Lesha's horse reared violently, throwing her from the saddle and galloping madly back the direction they'd come from. Ramesh cursed and leapt from his horse. Lesha got to her feet shakily and met his inquisitive expression with a nod. She was fine then. He leapt back to his own horse and wheeled it around to chase after leashes. Minutes passed. He'd rode hard, following the crushed underbrush that marked the horse's path, and from the crashing and snapping ahead of him seemed to be gaining on it. His own horse reared suddenly, danced backwards a few steps, and Ramesh gripped the reins tightly, avoiding his own tumble into the underbrush through the sheer bloody mindedness. Patting the horse, he whispered to it, calming it, when he realized that the noise of movement ahead had completely stopped. Tugging gently on the reins, he turned his own animal back toward the path ahead and started forward. The noise came suddenly and filled the forest. It was a tremendously large sound, and somehow palpably fleshy at the same time. There was a soft and liquid quality to the roar that sent goose flesh crawling up Ramesh's entire body. It was a roar that marked cleanly the delineation between predator and prey, and it was accompanied by a terrified whinny that was cut off by a sickening crunch. There was another loud crash, a rustling noise, and then silence. A full minute passed before Ramesh was able to get his breathing under control, and another minute before his horse would even move. But slowly, inevitably, they pushed forward towards the sound of whatever that horrendous exultation had been. Trees had been snapped, not sideways across the trunk, as if by an axe, but vertically, struck from below by some tremendous force. In the middle of the clearing, a massive mound of dirt had been displaced, recently too, judging by the dampness of the soil, while smaller disturbances were visible around the edge of the clearing. Of Felicia's horse there was no sign, and no evidence that it had left the clearing at all. The pattern of destruction had a clear edge, and beyond pardon me. And beyond that edge, the woods seemed undisturbed, the only evidence of any creature's passage being the trampled underbrush of the makeshift path that Ramesh and his animal had followed into the clearing. There was something else too. The by now too familiar scent of decaying foliage, sickly sweet and pungent, certainly, but something else too, something sharper, saltier. It smelt like the sea on a stagnant day, the smell of brine and seaweed. Neither smell was unfamiliar to Ramesh, yet here, leagues away from the nearest ocean, there was a menace to it that troubled him. And what exactly had happened to Leisha's animal? The tableau in front of Ramesh suggested it had been dragged underground. The deep roads were nearer to the surface here than they were in most parts of Thedas, but the speed with which the animal had been taken suggested something other than darkspawn. Tapping his own horse's flank with his boot, he spurred it forward, through the gap in the clearing that had entered, and back to where he'd left Lesha. Just take a quick little breathing break.
Yeah, what was that about having two people makes it easier on your throat?
Jack, you need some raw honey, it's true.
I have switched computers. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Fantastic.
Great. Wonderful. This is why you bring two people.
Or one working.
Just want to say there, though, the fact, I know it could just be seaweed and the smell of the sea and saltiness, but it just makes me think of the executors. Now, I know that Gillinan kind of has seaweed tentacles all around her anyway, but that just makes me think of the executors because they smell of the sea. But anyway, we'll talk about that. He found her off the side of the trail in a small clearing, and she wasn't alone. A third figure lay in front of her, a crumpled form in the blue and silver. A warden, one of Jovis's, more than likely. Dismounting the horse, he sprinted forward. Lesha half turned to speak.
She came stumbling out of the woods. She's raving mad.
She looked back at the wounded warden.
I'm doing what I can, but I'm not a healer. Something's wrong with her on the inside. More than just cuts or bleeding. Won't tell me what's wrong, though. Won't even look at me.
What do you mean by raving? What exactly is she saying?
Ramesh asked.
Nothing that makes even a bit of sense. Hear for yourself, though.
Lesha said. Ramesh moved over to where the wounded warden was lying, her head propped up by one of Lesha's saddlebags. Her skin was a ghostly white, and her breathing laboured. A hole had been torn through her armour at the stomach, and a wound gaped.
Oh boy. We didn't know, and now we do.
She giggled, a high-pitched noise that sent a shiver down Ramesh's spine.
Good to know, though. Oh yes, we know better. They taught us, gave us a lesson.
A coughing fit interrupted her, and she spat several times as if to clear a foul taste out of her mouth. Ramesh gave Lesha an inquisitive look, and she shook her head.
Whatever toxin's in her system is one that must work its way out naturally. No response to my magic. I can make her comfortable, nothing more,
She said. Ramesh crouched beside the injured warden and leaned forward.
Warden recruit Friedel, is it?
She nodded once, slowly, still refusing to meet his gaze.
Senior Warden Ramesh. My name, I mean. We're here looking for Jovis. You part of his group?
She nodded again, this time faster.
Good. Tell us what happened then.
We went too far, too deep. Something's down there, something bad. We thought it was Darkspawn, but it's worse, because it's different, you see. Not the same at all. Not twisted, but made, created. 3 died. They were lucky. I wasn't. Escaped, but not really.
She met Ramesh's gaze, then, and Ramesh recoiled in horror. Her eyes were gone, clawed out. Beside him, he was dimly aware of the sound of Lesha reaching into the bushes. Friedel began to weep, tears streaming forth from the empty sockets.
Gross. Don't make me go back. Not there. Not where they are. I will not. I cannot. We must leave. This place to her, to them.
She began to hit the ground. Sobs turned to screams that grew louder and louder.
They build it for her. They wait for her. I am free. I paid the price.
She started to scream once more, then came shrieks of pure terror intermixed with a laughter that contained not even a trace of humour. The screams grew until the volume was painful. With a suddenness that caught Ramesh off guard, she leapt forward, knocking him to the ground and running past him into the woods. She'd nearly made it out of the clearing into the trees when blue light streamed through Leisha's hands, surrounding the warden, enveloping her. She made it another dozen steps before staggering to her knees, and then collapsing to the ground, blessedly silent.
Sleep magic. I should have done that sooner.
Lesha paused, and then added quietly,
It's a small mercy, but the one I can give.
What do you think it is?
Ramesh asked, massaging his wrists. They were purpling and bruised. Tomorrow they would hurt more.
Fear. Whatever she has seen, it has broken her, poisoned her mind.
Lesha looked at Ramesh.
We cannot take her with us. If we do, it will break her beyond all repair. Right now...
She gave a helpless shrug.
She will live, and with time her mind may heal. But if we take her back to where Jovis is...
She corrected herself, hastily.
We may as well strike her down ourselves.
Leaving her is not an option. We must press forward. But if we leave her like this, food or no food, she'll die.
Lesha began to interrupt, and Ramesh held up a hand.
A day, maybe 2. By then, maybe, we can leave her with supplies while we venture on.
He looked her in the eyes.
Any questions?
There were none. They worked quite quickly, building a makeshift litter out of several fallen branches and the canvas from a spare bedroll that Ramesh's horse still carried. Placing Friedel on the litter, they tied her to it with several ropes. It was not a step he relished taking, but the way her eyes had been torn out suggested to him that she'd done the deed herself. Who was to say what else she would do if her hands remained free? Ooh. They pitched their tents, working quietly and competently. Ramesh set his own small one across the clearing from Lesha, an extra tent normally meant for keeping supplies dry. He'd given his other tent to her to replace the one that had been lost with her horse. Warden Friedel's litter they set under the canopy of a large tree, tying the remaining horse to a tree on the opposite side of the clearing. They built a small campfire and lit it with flint and steel. Unspoken agreement had Lesha saving her energy in case it was needed. They ate, and then Ramesh had first shift on guard. Midway through his shift, a sharp inhalation? Yeah, a sharp inhalation of air and slight rustle of cloth told him that Friedel had awoken. He looked across the clearing at her, waiting for her to move, but she remained silent and nearly still, showing no sign of her previous aggression. Then she began to whisper something to herself, over and over, a nearly silent litany. Ramesh came closer, trying to hear what it was she said, but his presence quite quieted her, and he returned to his seat. A few minutes passed, and the litany started up again, nearly silent, unsettling. The next several hours passed unremarkably, and soon it was time for the change of the guard. Stretching her hair tied up behind her with a leather strap, Lesha came out from her tent and exchanged nods with Ramesh. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the injured warden.
She's awake. Not doing much, though.
Ramesh stood up, and fatigue flooded his limbs. It had been a full day since he'd slept, riding hard towards where Jovis had disappeared.
Wake me up if anything interesting happens.
Lesha nodded, and Ramesh vanished into his own tent, closing the flap. He did not fall asleep, not immediately. Instead, from his boot, he pulled a piece of parchment tied with a long waxed string. A message from Jovis, 15 years past, telling him to wait. Oh. That they would find each other again, that duty, that sacrifice, could mean a whole lot of things. Ramesh had been too proud, too foolish, to acknowledge what that time had meant to him. 23 years was a long time, long enough to gather many regrets, but few had the same bitter taste to Ramesh as that one. He stared at the paper, reading the note again and again and again. A mantra across the decade. He hadn't said what he should have said then, but this was another chance. If it wasn't already too late. Oh my goodness. Folding the paper up, he placed it back into his boot carefully and pulled his blankets around him. Sleep took longer to come than he wanted, but finally it did. In his dream, Jovis, he'd been nearly 15 years ago. In his dream, Jovis, as he'd been nearly 15 years ago, was walking away, down the path, through the thick Navaran woods. But no matter how fast Ramesh ran, no matter how quickly he covered the distance between them, Jovis was always just out of reach. Finally, he caught up with him, and, grabbing his shoulder, turned him around. His eyes were gone, clawed out, and a sickening grin split his face. He reached towards Ramesh, towards his eyes, and pain erupted. Ramesh screamed. The sound came again, but this time from right outside his tent. He leapt upright, his blade in his hand before he had properly and fully awoken. The scream came again, quieter, and somehow wetter, and then tapered off. The sound of horses whinnying in panic, in terror, replaced it, and then a snapping sound and quickly receding hoofbeats. Nothing moved. The remains of the previous evening's campfire, a few embers still glowing faintly, sat in the middle of the clearing. Lesha's tent was still there, intact, and the litter that had carried warden recruit Friedel, the restraints were torn. No, not torn, chewed through. A thin, greyish fluid traced a path through the underbrush towards the edge of the clearing. He followed it into the bushes, away from the camp. And there, a dozen steps into the trees, lay the crumbled remains of Warden Friedel. She chewed through more than her restraints. Her wrists were torn open, tendons and arteries gone. Like a wild animal had savaged her, but the blood around her mouth told the truth of the story. Whatever had happened to her, whatever she'd seen with Jovis, it had done its work. Leisha had been half right. Friedel had been broken. Something else. Her mouth mixed with the blood, a trinkle of something else. That same thin, greyish fluid had traced her path from the litter. The reek of brine, of the ocean, was stronger, more present. He cast around the clearing, finding what he was looking for, a small branch. Whispering an apology, he forced it between her teeth and pried open her mouth. The grey fluid came out in a rush. Gallons and gallons of it spilled forth into the clearing, and he leapt back. It seemed to come for minutes, far longer and far more than should ever be inside a person. Finally, the flow abated, the stench of the ocean overpouring, throwing the branch to the ground in disgust. He took several steps back, making sure not to step into the grey effluvia
It's a new one.
into the grey effluvia and looked around. There was no sign of the horses. The trees that they had been hitched to, sturdy saplings, had snapped in half, and the crushed underbrush told the rest of the story. They'd escaped then, and with them went most of their supplies. Lesha came sprinting out of the woods, staff aglow and ready to use. She saw Ramesh, came over, and her eyes widened. She ran off several feet and proceeded to throw up. Ramesh did not blame her. He'd had to fight back his own nausea. She returned, wiping his mouth with the sleeve of her robe. She forced herself to look down at what remained of Friedel, swallowing again, making an effort to not lose her meal a second time. Ramesh turned to her.
Report, Acolyte.
The words came out more forcibly than he'd intended, but he didn't bother correcting his tone. She spoke, eyes still fastened to the litter.
I went to fetch more wood for the fire, but she was still alive, still here, when I left.
She looked at Ramesh and made no effort to conceal the fear in her eyes.
What's going on?
Tell you when I know, Acolyte.
The sky had already started to lighten, on the cusp of dawn. He looked around the ruined camp, the few supplies they had taken from their horse, and felt a stab of despair. The rest of their rations were on his horse, and Maker only knew where it had run off to. Between the two of them, they had 2, maybe 3 days' worth of food, and it was another half day to where Jovis had disappeared. Not to mention water. Their skins held enough for 2 full days. A little more if carefully rationed, but Ramesh had no desire to drink from any of the brackish streams they'd seen.
Build a pyre. Let's at least give her a proper end. She was one of us. Died in the line of duty.
But what duty was that? Something she'd seen? Something that had happened to her? And he blinked, and he blinked away sudden tears. Something that could have happened to Jovis. Almost certainly had happened to him. No, he would not let despair win. Would not believe that all was already lost. He dashed the back of his hand across his eyes, wiping them, and waved off Lesha's concerning look.
At least 4 days back to town. Could look for our animals, sure, find our rations, but could be we never find them. And then we're worse off, more than we are now. I mean, Jovis was fully supplied. Even for a party 3 times the size of his, we're likely to find something there.
He shook his head.
I don't like this, but I don't see any other options.
Lesha nodded at that. There really was no other option than to press forward, deeper into the unknown. No more banter, no more words. They walked down the path towards the mine, each in their own private world with only their thoughts for company. The silence was thick, oppressive, broken only by the muted sound of their boots on the muddy ground. They moved with purpose, Lesha lagging slightly behind and beside Ramesh, ready to act if necessary. The ground became rockier, harder, and the trees began to thin. The mountain that the path now led towards unerringly loomed in the distance. Its three asymmetrical peaks twisting around each other. Yet still that oppressive feeling, that smell of decay remained, and seemed to grow stronger as they left the forest, not weaker, and over it all that faint hint of brine. The path began to rise again, moving upward at a slow rate towards those 3 spires of rock. And along the path they began to see the first signs of civilization, albeit none that were recent. Mushrooms grew on a broken wagon at the side of the road. Houses, their windows dark and gaping, spotted the woods on either side of the path. Even at one point, a village long abandoned. They picked through the ruins of the latter, but found nothing useful. Whatever supplies had been there were long gone, either with the people who had fled, or perhaps, more likely, claimed by those who had business at the mine. There was only one other thing that Ramesh noted, though he did not mention it to his companion. Large mounds of dirt, similar to the one he'd seen upon the disappearance of Lesh's horse, were scattered throughout. He'd thought of telling Lesher about what he'd seen and heard, yet what truly was that? Disturbed dirt and a loud noise? He'd seen nothing else, not even the remains of Lesh's horse. Anything he told her was conjecture, and would only stir her already fertile imagination. Finally, the woods fell away altogether, and they found themselves at the crest of a ridge. Ahead of them loomed the mountains, its 3 peaks surrounding each other in an almost serpentine fashion. A single path led forward, its destination obscured by the hills on either side of it. They followed that path then, and turned the corner to a scene of destruction. At the base of the mountain slope, broken weapons of both Warden and Darkspawn make littered the ground. Trampled tents and broken equipment told the rest of the story, as did the blood that covered everything. There'd been a fight here, a big one, but not a single Warden body. Darkspawn corpses, dozens of them, but no evidence that any of Jovis's party had been slain. Yet the sheer amount of blood splashed everywhere suggested something grimmer. Darkspawn Ichor? Ichor, thank you. Darkspawn Ichor was easily distinguishable, even after it had dried. But this was something different, which meant that it had come from the missing party. Where were they then? Beside him, Lesh's staff was in her hands, magical energy thrumming, ready to be loosed. Ramesh had his own daggers out, an involuntary reaction to the scene before him, and he realised his own hands were sore from how tightly he was gripping the hilts. He took a deep breath and let it out. Once, twice, 3 times, forcing calm. Yes, things looked grim. There was in fact quite a lot of blood, and that rarely spoke to anything good. But there were no bones, which would have been left if the remains had indeed been eaten. There was still a chance that Jovis and his wardens were alive. He turned to his companion, making a show of sheathing his daggers.
We should split up. Figure out what exactly happened here. Look for anything that seems, well, relevant.
He shook his head, then added,
Looks grim, I know, but no bodies. That tells me they could still be alive. And that means we're going after them. But let's make sure that there's a them to go after.
Lesher nodded, her expression stoic, and moved deeper into the camp. He walked through the centre of the carnage, looking for a sign, for something to hold on to.
Damn it, Jovis,
he whispered. Despite his reassuring words to Lesher, he feared the worst. That there were no bodies meant that there were no bodies meant very little, as she knew. Perhaps they'd been captured, or any number of 100 of other things that meant they were dead, and that this whole adventure was pointless. Still, he searched. There were no campfires, no signs of cots or bedrolls. This was meant to be fortifications, then, not a camp. There were some provisions, but no more that then would last a single day. They'd expected a fight, and clearly gotten one. That they'd been overwhelmed seemed obvious. The number of Darkspawn corpses was enormous, and not just Hurlocks, but Genlocks, Shrieks, even a couple of emissaries. But there was something different about these Darkspawn. Here we go. The mutations that gave rise to their mindless hordes were far from consistent. Yet here, he saw variants unlike any he'd previously known. Hurlocks with extra arms, Shrieks with the powerful legs of a Genlock, and an emissary with a second head. Something strange. Normally, he would have written it off as merely being another aspect of the Darkspawn's physiology that was inexplicable. But combined with everything else, it was disturbing.
Here, over here.
Lesh's voice rang across the clearing, carrying a note of excitement. Ramesh ran over to find her standing in front of a large hole in the earth. Peering inside, he saw stairs leading down. Bloody boot prints, not of darkspawn, but of men. Jovis and his wardens. The flame of hope flickered once again in Ramesh's heart. The smell of brine was stronger here, more potent than anything else in the clearing, and it seemed to be coming from below. Beside him, Lesha muttered a word, and her staff began to glow. She pushed it inside the entrance to the hole, giving light to the darkness within. The edges of the circle cast by Lesha's spell revealed a small staircase that descended into an antechamber slightly larger than the clearing above, carved with a skill and delicacy that rivaled the works of Orzammar, or even Kalsharok. At the other end of the chamber, a doorway and a second staircase beyond that which spiraled into the darkness. The entire space lit by the glow of lyrium. And above the entrance, written in dwarven runes, a single word, Hormak. Supposed to be Hormak, but spelling mistake there, we do believe.
Or is it?
I know. I think John Epler did clarify when Tevinter Nights came out in 2020 that it is Hormak. But yeah. Hormak. They descended the spiral staircase. The minutes stretched on as they went farther and farther into the darkness, and the smell of seaweed grew even stronger. Finally, the staircase reached its end, and another door, larger, grander than before, sat open. They walked through, Lesha holding her magical light in front of them. The door opened into an enormous chamber, fallen into ruin, yet still no less grand for its current decay. It brought to Ramesh's mind the other dwarven taigs, but none of those he'd seen were in as dire shape as this one. It made sense. The fall of Hormak again. Okay, maybe is it that? I don't know. The fall of Hormak had come centuries before, consumed by the darkness. Yet it was oddly, unexpectedly quiet. Around the chamber, the old mixed with the new. The latter being the small tents and bedrolls, as well as other signs of recent habitation. There was blood, though less of it than above, and the utter destruction was lacking. Whatever had happened here had been smaller, the battle less pitched. Rusted shovels and picks leaned against a wall in neat rows. Skeletons, several of which had fallen to dust, wore the remains of dwarven armour. The remains of a mining party or a deep roads expedition, then, long dead, but the hall bore more recent signs of Jovis's wardens. Guard fires had been lit at either end of the chamber. He poked at the ashes of one. Beneath them, a few embers still smouldered. He threw a few branches on, blew on them until the fire was flickering once again. Preserved foods, stored in jars, sat in neat piles next to the fires, along with several baskets full of bread and smoked meat. He reached down and picked up a loaf. The bread was hard, but showed no signs of mould. So then the camp had been abandoned. Recently, but not too recently. The only entrance seemed to be the door through which they'd come. Every other doorway was choked with debris. The largest opening wide enough to admit a mouse, nothing larger. Unless they doubled back, returned up above, there seemed no place for the wardens to have gone. Something drew his eye. A half-dozen or so small drums, bearing an unknown dwarven mark, were piled at a comfortable distance from the fires. They seemed old, perhaps as old as the dwarves, but they were in remarkably good condition. Lesha was kneeling in front of them. She looked up at Ramesh's approach, and he raised a questioning eyebrow.
Lyrium charges. The dwarves use them to remove obstacles, open up passages. I've seen them before, though none of this make.
She stood up, absent-mindedly wiping her face on her robe.
Unfortunately, they're mostly useless without the fuse, unless you're happy to blow yourself up with them.
I've never heard of them, never seen them.
Not many surfacers have. They use them to open up some of the old tunnels under Minrathous.
She stood up and gave him a faint smile.
Makes a big boom.
Why here, though?
Ramesh asked, frowning.
There's a reason we don't come to this part of the deep roads much. Whole place is unstable. Dumas really did a number on it.
Don't know. Mining expeditions take them along just in case. Passage collapses, something's blocking your way. Lot easier than chipping through with a pickaxe. Must be careful, though.
She looked around uneasily.
Like you said, place like this, not properly shored up, who knows what you'll get.
That sounds a little bit dangerous.
Certainly. I understand it's fairly common among the dwarves, though.
She hesitated, then added,
Good for sealing things up, just in case you want to make sure someone or, well, something doesn't get out.
She glanced around the room, looking for something, the missing fuses, maybe, or a further clue to Jovis's whereabouts. Her eyes widened.
Look!
Grabbing Ramesh's arm, she pointed forward into the darkness, towards one of the massive stone pillars.
Right there. Looks like markings of some sort. Fresh, too. See? No dust.
Sure enough, several marks had been scratched into the pillar. And he looked at the next pillar, there too, and then to the left. The same set of 3 marks had been sloppily scratched into each pillar. Whoever had done so had been in a hurry. Beside him, Lesher shifted uneasily.
Looks like Dwarven mining sign. Tells you who's been this way, when they're coming back. But I don't recognize the marks themselves.
She said.
You wouldn't. They're marks of a warden. Well, some wardens. I mean, senior ones. Ferelden, specifically. Great way to keep from being abandoned at the deep roads. Look.
He pointed to the closest pillar.
See this? 3 marks. The first is a date. Looks like 3 days ago. Then that's when you leave. The second's how many of you there are. 6 marks means 6 wardens. And the third...
He felt silent. Beside him, Lesher gave him an inquisitive look.
What does the third mean?
Ramesh shook his head, and there was no mistaking the grief in his voice.
That's when you expect to be back. Means that if you miss that day, they're supposed to send a search party.
On his other side, Lesher reached out a gloved hand and traced the mark.
So, when did they plan to come back?
That's the thing. They didn't plan to come back. This is a warning. They don't want us coming after them.
Silence filled the cavern, then, somehow, more oppressive than before. The flicker of hope that Ramesh had felt was gone, buried under despair and a growing sense of unease, of fear. Finally, Lesher broke the quiet, her own voice tinged with a hint of terror.
But we're still going after them, right? We're wardens. That's what we do. We're not just going to...
Ramesh raised a hand, cutting off the argument.
Don't need to convince me. I'm with you. Leave no one behind, right?
There's
the...
Sorry.
Oh, wait, no,
Not
that
you.
was you.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's you. No, it's you.
Is that me?
Yeah, it's you.
Oh, yeah. There's the right thing to do and the wrong thing. Personally, I'm about the right thing.
He shook his head, then added quietly.
Remember the oath. We're going down there, and...
Something itched in the back of his mind, and it took a moment for him to realize what. Darkspawn. He drew both daggers in a single, practiced motion.
Company.
They came from the darkness. 9 Darkspawn, Genlocks and Hurlocks both, and led by an emissary. Yet where their entrance would normally be marked by a gibbering and jabbering, these were eerily silent.
wrong with them?
Lesha asked. It took Ramesh a moment to realize what she meant. They were changed, different. One Herlock had the tail of a scorpion, another a Genlock, but with a longer, thinner skull, more avian. And then there was no more time for words. They attacked as one, charging forward. A blast of fire from Lesha's staff caught the closest Genlock full on in its all too human face, sending it flying backward, its head a charred ruin. Another Genlock came at Lesha, its head narrower, thinner, jaw elongated. She threw herself into a slide, raising her staff in a two-handed defensive posture. The creature's jaw struck the hilt, its momentum shifting, and it went flying past her before it struck the wall with a sickening crunch. The mass of darkspawn spread out, moving to separate and isolate the two wardens, with a level of cunning and guile unusual for their kind. 3 Herlocks and the emissary moved towards Ramesh, weapons out. With a speed and flexibility that belied his years, he ducked under the swing of a brutal sword. A fist followed the sword, but where Ramesh expected the fist to be, there was instead a serpent's head. It snapped at him, missing by inches, venom dripping from its fangs. His momentum carried him under the blow, and he rose, swinging both daggers at once and taking the Herlock's head right off its shoulders, ichor sprouting from the wound. Another Herlock blade scythed in from the left. He caught the sword on his daggers, turning the weapon away and rolling. A blast of green energy flew over his head and burned a hole through the centre of the creature. The last 2 Herlocks moved towards Ramesh, weapons drawn. He fainted. He fainted towards the creature on the left. It took the bait and recoiled, while the rightmost Herlock lunged forward. He'd been waiting for that and caught its blade on the hilt of his dagger before shifting his grip and driving one weapon through the Herlock's chest. It slumped forward. Fire drew a burning line down his left side as the other creature's blade caught the edge of his armour, drawing blood but nothing more. It swung again, and Ramesh parried the blow, smashing his armoured fist into its face, sending it reeling in a shower of broken teeth. He caught the barest flicker of movement out of the corner of his eye and threw himself to the ground. A blast of fire moved through the space where his head had been only moments before. Ramesh rolled to his feet and turned to face the emissary. It rose above the ground, massive bat-like wings, giving it an agility uncommon to its kind. Keeping out of reach of Ramesh's daggers, it fired magic blasts at him as they circled and dove at its head, swinging its long sword, using its longer reach to its advantage. Ramesh dodged once, twice, but the exertion was beginning to wear on him. Suddenly he stumbled, and the emissary, its screech of victory, the only noise it had made, lunged forward. But Ramesh's mistake had been a ruse. He ducked under the blow, letting the creature's momentum carry it right onto his 2 daggers. It impaled itself on his weapon and slumped, dead, before sliding to the ground. There was silence. The other darkspawn were dead, dealt with by Lesha. She was sitting on a rock beside him, gingerly wrapping a bandage around her torso. She saw Ramesh's look of concern and shook her head.
Got a little cocky. Thought I had the first one off balance. I misjudged and it got a piece of me. Oh, and it had a scorpion tail. Didn't seem to have any venom in it, though. Lucky break.
She gingerly touched the wound and winced.
Looks worse than it is.
She looked at Ramesh.
Why did it have a scorpion tail? And why did that emissary have wings?
He could only shrug.
I don't know. Never seen anything like that. This is something new.
Lesha sighed, stood up.
Unless they came from the surface, I can't think of how they got in. There must be another exit. One we didn't see.
She paused, deep in thought. Ramesh was carefully silent. Her eyes brightened.
Of course. The warden signs.
She limped to the nearest pillar.
See? First one, and then it continues.
She ran to the second pillar, then to the third.
It's a path. They marked each pillar as they hit it.
Ramesh heaved himself to his feet and followed after her. The markings continued for several hundred more meters before abruptly ending. The last pillar half buried in the wall, but something was strange, different. Ramesh was first to vocalize it.
Notice this? Only place in this whole damned room that the floor is clear.
The debris and refuse that covered the ground nearly everywhere else in the chamber was completely gone in front of that one section of wall. Ramesh shook his head.
Secret door, I'll be damned.
He frowned.
But how does it open?
Lesha shrugged.
I imagine it opens the same way as any other door.
She pointed at the bottom of the section of wall. There, almost imperceptible, were a series of grooves, handholds, barely visible. Ramesh gave Lesha an approving glance, and she smiled, faintly, some of her usual bravado restored.
Let's see where it goes,
Ramesh said. The shrill screech of stone grinding on the floor filled the room as Ramesh hooked his fingers into the grooves on the giant slab and heaved upward with all of his might. It resisted, and then slowly moved, sliding within the rock above into some hidden alcove. With a grunt of effort, Lesha rolled a large boulder forward and under the door.
Alright, back up.
She did, and she released the door. He leaped backward, safely out from under the door's massive weight. It started to slide back down, before encountering the resistance of the boulder. There was a moment of uncertainty, where the doorway gouged a small groove into the top of the stone. But finally, it stopped, braced open. Warm air trickled out of the passageway, the stench of brine and decay now overpowering. Several steps in, the passageway sloped downward and seemed to curve gently inward, forming a spiral ramp that led ever deeper into the darkness. Ramesh took a deep breath, the air stinging his lungs. Beside him, the wood of Lesha's staff creaked as she tightened her grip until her knuckles were white.
I assume this is where Jarvis and his team went. Makes sense to go this way. No time like the present, right?
The confidence in her words was absent in her tone. Ramesh nodded, though his every instinct warned him against venturing down the fetid passage.
Anyone's still alive, they'll be this way. Count out 8 hours. If we don't find them by then, we come back. Alright?
Ramesh said, noting the strain in his own voice. Lesha nodded. Taking deep breaths, like swimmers about to plunge into a frozen lake, they started down the winding passageway, deeper into the darkness, deeper into the bowels of the earth. They continued in silence for what seemed like hours, neither wanting to give voice to their fears, and soon the lack of conversation felt like a necessity. The idea of their words echoing down the seemingly endless tunnel and awakening something gnawed at them. The slope of the ground started to abate, and the walls began to take... The slope of the ground started to abate, and the walls began to take on a more sculpted appearance. Blank rock gave way to carvings, mostly too worn and damaged to make out. Lesha paused in front of one image that had largely survived. It was a simple painting of 3 figures: a supplicant, a priestess, and a monster. Lesha was the first to break the silence.
This reminds me of something. What, exactly?
She shook her head.
Almost like Avar cave paintings, but dwarven, maybe?
Ramesh leaned in and squinted.
They look more elven to me. At least the people in the picture do, I mean.
It's not about the people. Look, every culture has their own artistic signature, something that makes it theirs. Tevinter is all about sharp angles. Ferelden is hard and brutish, and Orlais is delicate and opulent. Dwarves are, well, simple is the wrong word, but they get right to the truth.
If it's dwarven, what's it say?
Not sure, but look, it's the same image repeated, with slight variations.
She pointed to another painting that was partially intact.
3 figures, the supplicant, the queen, and the monster, except the person and the monster change. Not a lot, but a little. Enough to tell. But the priestess remains.
She was right. The creature changed a bit every time, as did the figure. But the priestess remained the same, or at least almost the same. It was perhaps the oppressive nature of the place acting upon his worst fears. But it seemed to him that the priestess's smile grew a little wider and a little crueler with each subsequent image. His every instinct screamed to him to turn back, to abandon Jorvis and his wardens to whatever fate they had found. His training, his oath, even they told him it was too late to turn back. There was nothing more that could be done for his comrades.
I don't like this place. It's just wrong. That's the only word I can think of.
Lesher's voice still carried that note of fear, but it was sharper now, more distinct. It was a sentiment that Ramesh sympathized with deeply. But something more than duty drew Ramesh forward, words unspoken, and something greater than a simple oath. The wardens were his family, and Jorvis could again be, something more. He could no more turn back then than he could tear off his own arm. If he did abandon Jorvis, if he made the cold and simple calculation, what returned to the surface would no longer be Ramesh.
You should go. Get out of here. Only one of us needs to risk their life.
He started back. He started back down the corridor before doubt and fear could change his mind. He'd only gone a few dozen steps when Lesher caught up to him. He gave her a look, equal parts gratitude and concern, and she smiled tightly in response. They continued down the passageway. Around them the walls grew smoother, larger. Delicate carvings started to appear, then flowers and creatures that Ramesh did not recognize. Finally, the hallway came to an end. In front of them, 2 massive stone doors hung partway open. They stood there a long minute. There was something menacing about the doors. Unbidden, his thoughts turned to crocodiles, jaws hanging open, waiting for their lunch to come to them. It was yet another minute before he screwed up his courage enough to proceed. Moving together, they walked slowly, deliberately through the opening. The scale of the room was vast. In the darkness, he could not tell where the room ended, but judging by the echoes, it was immense. Beside him, Lesher let out a low whistle, her fear temporarily forgotten, chased away by the scene before her. What details he could make out in the glow of Lesher's staff were incredible, carvings of a fineness and beauty that transcended any he had ever seen, covered every surface of the cave. As a warden, he'd seen as much of the deep roads as any. The greatest works of the dwarves, buried for centuries in ruined taigs behind seemingly endless waves of darkspawn. This was something different, something more. There was no question in his mind that these ruins were elven in nature. While dwarven architecture remained the rule in the deep roads, there were exceptions. From time to time, wardens would find unmistakably elven architecture scattered among dwarven works. This, however, was exclusively, entirely elven. There were no dwarven works interspersed throughout, not even any signs of the darkspawn that filled so much of the underground, and this chamber was nearly pristine. The usual signs of age, of water dripping from above or pooling from below, were absent. Debris was scattered on the ground in places, broken vessels and shattered chests, but the room itself was intact. Fluted columns receded into the darkness above, carved in patterns that seemed to shift. Depending on how you look at them, their surface smoothed to Ramesh's touch, speaking to the quality of the work and the fineness of the carvings. On the surface of the walls were carved massive bas-reliefs, running in 3 parallel bands and disappearing into the darkness in either direction. The detail was exquisite, and Ramesh quickly realized that what he had first thought to be some kind of paint or pigmentation was in fact millions of tiny gemstones set into the stone. The images engraved into the stone seemed almost alive, each one a perfectly frozen moment as the actors within marched through their stories. On the topmost band, stately elven kings and queens held court, their people kneeling before them in respectful supplication. On the middle, scenes of healing and succour, of disease and injury being drawn forth from the sick and dying by elven mages. And on the bottom, Aravels, far more elaborate and grandiose than any that Ramesh had ever seen, pulled by armies of Hala toward distant mountains, one of which, he realized with a start, was that same mountain that they were now beneath, the 3 jagged peaks that twisted around each other, easily distinguishable in the detailed carvings. It was, taken as a whole, magnificent, and yet the more he stared at it, the more disquieting it became. There was something slightly off, something that set his teeth on edge and his palms itching for the comforting feel of his weapons. Not one specific thing, but a preponderance of little things, all adding up to an aura of quiet, deliberate menace. The striations on the columns, random at first, began to form patterns, oh here we go, before Ramesh's eyes. The same symbol, the horns of a Hala, repeated on each column. The symbol seemed to shift, changing in an inexplicable way that made Ramesh's eyes water. He tore them away, focusing instead on the bas-reliefs that ran around the chamber, yet even they suddenly seemed wrong. The lowest band of carvings, the Hala pulling the Aravel, was off. The Hala was different, wrong. They had too many horns for one, and a harder, more rounded look than was normal. A look that was almost insectile, and the horns themselves were longer and rigid, organic somehow, and the Aravals were unlike any he had seen. The windows were barred, and they bore more resemblance to a prison ship than anything else. The middle band, with its scent of healing, seemed now twisted, wrong. No longer did it seem as though mages were drawing corruption and disease out of the wounded and infirm, but instead they forced it in, pushing it through and into the fallen bodies. The expressions on the faces of those elven rulers betrayed a contempt that was almost palpable. The beatific smiles edged with disgust and disdain for the creatures at their feet, and the subjects, far from kneeling in reverence as Ramesh had first thought, seemed more to be cowering in terror.
Fuck.
A single word. Lesha exchanged a glance with Ramesh and shook her head once. She'd seen it too. Then, the urge to turn back, to return to the surface, was even stronger in the room. But a strangely rhythmic hum was growing louder and seemed to be coming from the other end of the cavernous space. One more room then, and they'd leave. They moved quickly, purposefully, through the massive chamber. The bas-reliefs started to repeat the same images as before. They paid them little mind, having already had their appetite for the strange art soured. Finally, they reached the opposite end of the space. Massive doors, at least 100 feet wide, were set in the wall. But there, to the side, the path showing signs of greater wear than anything else in the chamber, a smaller door the size of a single person. Not wanting to spend any more time than they absolutely needed to in that cursed space, they moved quickly. The door had a simple handle, its elaborate carvings worn smooth in places. The stench of decay, of brine, was almost overpowering here. Ramesh swallowed. He had no illusions. Whatever waited for them on the other side of the door was not to be salvation. Leisha gave a small smile, but it was forced.
Ready.
As I'll ever be.
Holding each other's hands, they opened the door and stepped through. Rank upon rank of twisted, grotesqueries.
Escaries.
Rank
Why
upon
do I have to correct you?
because I'm a writer, not a reader. No. Rank upon rank of twisted, grotesque. Grotesque. Oh, I can't say it. Grotesque.
That one, yeah.
Yeah, filled the cave. Each one was a twisted horror of body parts assembled seemingly at random. The fanged maw of a serpent rested atop the slender neck of a harler, moving rapidly on the limbs of a vatterel. A massive spider scurried about, its many eyes replaced instead with the heads of a dozen serpents, each one dripping venom from exposed fangs. And in the centre, a massive pool, filled with a viscous grey fluid. The scent of brine wafted forth from it. Above it, a massive lyrium crystal hung suspended. It glowed with a sickly light, tinged with lyrium and green. Streamers of energy flowed from it into the pool, sending it bubbling wherever it touched. Moving carefully, silently, they entered the room. They crept forward as far as they could manage without being seen. When they reached the edge, they stopped, taking shelter behind a large boulder made of smooth onyx. One of several that lined the upper part of the chamber, conspicuous in their uniformity and regularity. They watched as a Hurlock walked towards the pool, stiff-legged. It broke the surface of the grey ichor, which reacted instantly, flowing around the creature. In moments it was completely submerged. Out of the murk rose a cocoon, iridescent and pulsing with a green light. There was a hissing sound, a flash of light, and the cocoon shattered. Yet what came out was not a Hurlock. It had the head of one, but that head rested on the body of a massive drake.
Make breath.
Whispered Ramesh. The entire room was a menagerie.
Nursery.
Actually good. Was a menagerie of horror, each creature worse than the last. This was an army. Not Darkspawn, though. Something worse. He signalled to Lesher. It was time to leave. To warn the wardens. They turned, moving with purpose towards the exit. But Lesher, her wounds still not fully healed, stumbled, her staff slipping from her fingers as she tried to brace herself. The reaction was immediate. I know how to say this one. A cacophony of sound, of voices, rose, and he could feel, more than hear, the massive stampede behind him. And then a screech, louder and deeper than any other, filled the chamber. It was more than a noise. It was a physical force issued from a throat larger than any he'd ever seen. And then the stone they sheltered behind moved. It twitched and slid away. Boulder after boulder, each the same, slid past, and the creature's full length was revealed. It looked like nothing less than a massive centipede. Each segment was the size of a horse, each leg the size of a small tree. It shifted, faster than Ramesh would have thought possible, and the chamber shook with its movement. It surrounded him and Leisha, cutting off escape. Ramesh swung his daggers at one of the segments. A white substance splashed out and onto the stone, where it immediately began to bubble and hiss. The daggers themselves fared little better. The blade that had bit into the creature was fastly melting, turning into useless slag. The creature reared up, hundreds of legs twitching spasmodically in the air. and Ramesh gripped his sword tightly. Beside him, the hum of magic, ready to be released. Ramesh had no illusions. This was a foe beyond him, but he would make it pay a steep price for his life. It crashed down towards him, and he braced himself for the impact, the crushing weight. It never came. Instead, the creature jerked, spasming in midair and arching over the pair of wardens, smashing instead into the ground beside them. The lower half rocked, sending a series of small tremors through the cavern and bringing debris tumbling from the ceiling above. The creature twitched, thrashing side to side as if locked in battle, and started to turn. It fought against itself, its movement staccato and uneven, the actions tinged with unwillingness. Finally, whatever internal conflict it had been waging was resolved, and it turned in earnest. The massive bulk shifted, the segments retreated, and the end of the creature, the head, or what seemed most like descendant, and with it came the greatest horror of the day. Where the creature's head should be, was instead a humanoid figure. He sat astride the creature. No, not astride it. Ramesh realized with revulsion that the figure was part of it. The shittiness exterior flowed into the flesh. The lines between them blurred. His body had fused with the monstrosity, became one. And the face, Ramesh knew then, with horrifying clarity, what had happened to the man that he had risked everything to find. What Frudel's warnings had meant, and why she had killed herself, rather than come back to this gruesome place. Before him, twisted and broken, was Warden Jovis. Yee. It was him from the waist up, but bloated, grotesque, and his flesh flowed into that of the massive creature. His eyes stared blankly, unseeing, the mouth too wide and lipless, stretched and moved uneasily, as if only now remembering human speech.
Ramesh.
The voice came slowly, as if across a great gulf of memory, and possessed an almost insectile buzz that tore at Ramesh's tattered nerves. The head turned slightly, and the eyes shifted, staring at Ramesh through him. They focused, and in them Ramesh recognized his friend. Tears came to his own eyes, unbidden, blurring his vision. Ramesh made no attempt to wipe them away. The memory of the past, of better times spent leagues away from this place. This broken nightmare pressed down on him, a weight of regrets and unspoken feelings. Ramesh blanched but stood firm, meeting the monstrous gaze. It blinked slowly. Behind him, Ramesh heard Lesha swallow.
It is Warden Ramesh, yes?
The voice was clearer now, more human.
Yes, Jovis. Yes, it's me. Maker, what did they do to you?
The Jovis thing shifted its bulk, turning so its entire body now faced Ramesh.
We drank. Works differently for us. Can't just touch it. We need it inside. Takes a while. They turned us. 2 halves, 2 whole. Trying to be 2 ones. But I stayed me, and it hates that.
It twitched, the cavern shaking in sympathy.
Not forever. Not for long. Just for now. Enough.
The buzz returned to the voice, insistent.
And we waited for you. Oh, yeah. Now you come.
The creature screamed, and Jovis's voice came back.
Can't let this out. Got to bury it. Bury me.
The words came even more slowly, each one being forced through whatever will battled Jovis's foot for control of this creature.
She cannot have it. Not again. Locked for a reason. Who, Jovis? Who can't have it?
The creature made a gurgling noise, and it took Ramesh a moment to realize that it was laughing.
Hey, Ramesh. Always the wrong question.
A shudder rippled through the monstrous bulk, and the insectile buzz was back in Jovis's words.
Delirium. Blow it up. Take this place down. Collapse the entrance.
It started to twitch again, and the next words were muffled, forced.
Stop me. Stop us.
Jovis's face twisted in pain, in surprise, and he slumped forward. Ramesh started forward, his remaining weapon gripped firmly. He could do one thing, at least. End Jovis's suffering, just as he reached the warden's body. However, the eyes snapped open, now black and devoid of any humanity. The creature grinned, the expression alien and horrifying on Jovis, before letting out an ear-splitting screech and charging forward. The creature's massive bulk rushed towards Ramesh, too fast to dodge, and he braced himself for the crushing force. There was a sizzle, a scream of insectile surprise, and a massive flash of light, blinding Ramesh momentarily. When his vision cleared, he saw the wall of green light between him and the monstrous insect. Lesher's face was white with the strain. Jovis, whatever his essence, his spirit that had animated his face, was gone, buried under the alien will that drove the beast as it pushed against the energy field she'd created. It shittered angrily, then reared and crashed down once again, sending Lesher skidding several steps backwards, but the wall held.
Go.
She forced out through gritted teeth. Sweat beaded on her forehead, beaded on her forehead and trickled down.
Not without you, Acolyte.
Ramesh grabbed one of the darkspawn weapons that littered the floor. That littered the floor of the caravan and hefted it. Good balance. Lesher shook her head, then said,
Warn the wardens. Bury this blasphemy. I will buy you time.
The creature redoubled its pressure on her shield, and her staff began to smoke. Her nose bled, blood trickling out of both nostrils. The rest of the creatures in the chamber began to stir. One chimeric monstrosity, a bat with the tail of a scorpion, lunged past the shield, striking at Lesher. Ramesh cut it out of the air, sending its limb body tumbling to the ground, its acidic venom a hissing noise as it etched the stone. More of the creature skittered around the edges of Lesher's shield, striking at Ramesh. The Hurlock that they'd seen earlier breathed a jet of fire, singling the edges of Ramesh's cloak and catching Lesher in the legs. She grunted in pain and dropped to her knees. Before her, the shield started to crack, the sheer mass of the behemoth overwhelming her reserves of energy, and it let out another shriek, this one of triumph. Despair crept over Lesher's features and over Ramesh's heart. This was it, then, the end. She looked at the creature, tears in her eyes, and then past it, above it, that single lyrium crystal, as large as any he'd ever seen. He saw then the shape of her plan, of her desperation. He started to leap forward, to stop her, but he was too late. The shield collapsed. The magic flew from her fingers, striking that one perfect crystal, and it exploded. The blast sent Ramesh flying, tumbling backward. He slid across the stone ground, before finally slamming into the wall, his breath knocking from him. A scream of rage, of anger issuing forth, not just from one throat, but from 100. The loud crack of stone filled the cavern. From above, a shower of pebbles, of rocks, and then of boulders, as the ceiling began to fracture. The rock where the crystal had hung was starting to crack. The rock spider webbing as entire sections broke free. Stalactites tumbling down and striking the ground with a crunch. And then, the loudest crack of all as the ceiling finally completely gave way. Hundreds of tons of rock avalanched down, a deafening cacophony that stole away all other sound. Like a series of dominoes, the rocks continued to fall, stone showering down from unknown caverns above. Everything in the chamber had been buried by now, but still the rock fell, as if the earth itself sought to bury every trace of what lay beneath it. The sound started to slacken. The deluge became a shower, a trickle, and then silence. The occasional echo of a pebble tumbling down the slope of the cave-in, but otherwise silence. And in front of him, a wall of rock, taller than the chamber Lesher had done it. He blinked back tears. In death, sacrifice. She had fulfilled her oath, as well as any warden before. But Ramesh had not. He still lived. Minutes passed before he was able to stand, and it was still longer before he could tear his eyes away from Lesher's cairn. Propping himself up on the darkspawn weapons he'd taken, he started towards the entrance, a single step at a time. Behind him, a clattering sound, a pebble, and then another, and another. He turned. Slowly, impossibly. The stone was shifting. Rocks flew away, boulders revealing the chitinous mass of the creature. The shower became an avalanche. The cacophony of falling rock filled the room, seeming to fill time itself. Slowly it rose, pulling itself from the rubble, and before long it filled the chamber once more. The sound of chittering once again, and then it turned slowly, menacingly towards him. The face of Jovis, what had once been Jovis, creased in a smile that was in no way human. Ramesh ran. He ran through the elven ruins, up the colossal spiral slope. Behind him, beside him, always nearby came the chittering, the grinding sound of rock as the creature bore its way toward him. Even when his breath grew short, even when his fatigue threatened to steal his legs from him, he pressed on. Finally, he emerged, sweating and panting, into the deep roads themselves. For a moment, Ramesh forgot where he was. Black panic threatened to steal over him then, but he fought it down, fought it back, there. The remains of the fire he'd lit when first they'd entered into the deep roads. What felt like weeks ago, aware that it had only been minutes, perhaps less, before the hideous creation pulled its way into the light. He ran towards the cask of lyrium. 2 at a time, he rolled them towards the massive door, until all dozen of them sat in a clumsily heaped pile. He remembered what Lesher had said about the fuses, pulled the note from Jovis from his boot, took the string that wrapped it. It would do. He took a stick from near the fire, wrapped it up in cloth, and lit it. Waited. From the depths the creature broke free, stone firing upwards in gouts of earth. Segment after segment poured through the hole until it was finally free. It reared, its massive bulk scraping the top of the tunnel, and looked hungrily around the chamber. It spotted Ramesh then and shrieked, an almost human note of triumph in that animalistic noise. It charged towards him, covering the ground in an impossibly short time. He had one chance, and one chance only. He stood his ground, waiting, now. Lighting the fuse of the cask he held. He rolled out of the way, he rolled out of the way of the creature's charge, close enough to hear its chitin rasp against the fabric of his own cloak, and threw the cask behind him. The monster tried to change its course, but couldn't, its own weight and size working against it. It slammed into the wall with titanic force, the impact shaking the cave, nearly sending Ramesh flying. It shrieked again, this time in rage, and he could hear the clattering of 100 insectile feet as it tried to right itself. He ran up the spiral staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Through the antechamber he went, nearly losing his footing, correcting and leaping to the first step, to the third. He only hoped he'd judged his timing properly, that he hadn't cut the fuse too short or left it too... The earth moved, and a wall of sound, just like the fist of an angry titan, lifted Ramesh, throwing him out of the entrance to the deep roads and tumbling down the side of the hill. The screech of the creature turned from rage to pain, to despair, and weakened in volume, before cutting off entirely. Behind him, the earth shifted, the hill collapsing inward, downward, burying the creature with not just a roof, not just a cave, but the entire mountain. Struggling to his feet, Ramesh stumbled down the mountain. Behind him, it continued its implosion, falling in on itself and whipping away that blasphemous place. Every moment, he expected to hear that scream, that insectile buzz, but it never came. Silence replaced the thunder of falling rock behind him. Thunder came again, but it was real thunder this time. The rain started to fall, a soft drizzle, the water mixing with the tears that streamed freely down Ramesh's face. Tears of mourning, of grief, for Felicia, for Jovis, for the rest of the wardens, whatever doom had taken them. But tears of relief too. He'd made it out. He'd survived. And more important, he could tell the other wardens. Warn them about the horror. Warn them about what lurked beneath Hormak. And maybe, probably, elsewhere as well, because he remembered something. Something about the bas-relief that he'd dismissed at the time, but which now loomed large in his memory. The mountain he'd brought down, the one that buried that nightmare under thousands of tons of rocks, was not the only one to which the Aravels brought their prey. There had been, before the image repeated, 11 others. Dun dun dun! And it ends just like that.
Yep.
Flipping heck. I know. Flipping heck.
Yeah. So yeah, what was that about? Like, oh yeah, with 2 people, you won't have to read that.
I forgot that the amount of dialogue for this one. Really flipping good story though. Like bloody hell.
Yeah.
The absolute dark fantasy nature of that. It's flipping good.
I made the mistake of reading this for the first time late at night. Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking, and it was really hard to sleep after that. That's all I'm gonna say.
What do you mean? It's a lovely bedtime story.
About 2 lovers reuniting.
Exactly.
I really like it. I mean, like, it is one of the best stories. Just I love dark fantasy anyway, so the pure horror elements of that, it's fantastic. I'll let you speak for a bit, Lucas, because I'm gonna drink the rest of my tea. But let me know how come it is your favorite? Because I remember when you read it back when as well, but even now I know you reiterate how much you love the story.
When I first read it, it reminded me of what I found so great about Origins, which was the first Dragon Age I played, and it gave me hope that the game that would come out in the future would be something like that. You know, just like no fucks given, dark fantasy, horror, just some really, really messed up shit.
Hell yeah, absolutely. And the fact that John Epler was a QA test, well, the fact that John Epler started their journey at BioWare in QA and then went into narrative cinematic design, and now they're the creative director. The fact that John Epler wrote this story and has such a significant role for the Veilguard, albeit 2021 after Matthew Goldman came in, so we don't really know how much. Again, there'll still be some, obviously there'll be still massive aspects of John Epler's creative direction in the Veilguard, but that was originally Mike Laidlaw's job, and then Matt Goldman's job, and now it's his job. So of course his vision will still be incorporated to some degree, but that has been like a role that has came about of that very ominous situation with Matthew Goldman. But how comforting is it to know that John Epler has such a significant role on the next Dragon Age game, and he wrote this story. Like, that's brilliant. Hopefully it showcases that they are going to, at least in some direction, jump into that dark fantasy aspect, especially with Gillinan taking such a central role in the game. Hopefully.
I really hope they will at least put like the ruin of Hormak in it.
And I think we'll see Ramesh as well. There was that Faded Calls 2023 Dragon Age Day T thing last year, where there was a Grey Warden. They sounded old. That could have been Ramesh. It could have been anybody really, but it could be. I think that could be Ramesh too. I think we'll see him. I think he was introduced for a reason, and he survived for a reason. To tell the rest of the Wardens, we're going to the Anderfells, we're going to Weishaupt. Surely we'll be able to sympathise with him, and he can tell us about the horrors that he witnessed. That'd be sick.
I mean, given the presence of Gillenan and his experience now, it's kind of it's kind of a given that he'll appear and then probably tragically die.
Oh yes, because good. Yeah, it did say. Lesh had fulfilled her oath in death sacrifice, but Ramesh had not. He still lived. Oh yeah. Oh, that is good. That didn't. Yeah, picking up on the fact that foreshadowing his death, but a good sacrifice death.
Yep.
Okay, give us those dwarven tags of those evil darkspawns, and let's see those mutilated creatures. Well, we've already seen Spider with hands, haven't we?
Yeah, we did.
Wasn't
that like one of the first concept images they showed?
2020 Gamescom Spider with hands, and we all want to romance him.
Yeah.
Or it. Yeah. What do you think of Horror of Hormak, Emily?
I have some thoughts. I was taking some notes while you were reading the last part. But like, just kind of like I don't know really how to articulate this. Not red flags in my head.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe the lower red flags in my head were kind of waving patriotically. But I'm wondering if, partly because of the story, if that's one of the reasons why Solus doesn't like the Wardens, because they're messing around in places they shouldn't be and could possibly release things. Because in Trespasser, spoiler alert, it does say that when you get to a certain room, that Solus sealed away, kind of like he hid what they were doing in the deep roads. And so I'm wondering if he was one of the one who personally hid or sealed away what was going on in Hormak.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And that's a good theory.
I
think like maybe that, but also I think part of the reason Solus probably doesn't like the Wardens is because they, take in the Blight, which probably Solus knows exactly what it's about. And I think he's like mad that they're messing with that, which they don't understand.
It's kind of
it could also be that he's mad that they're poking around in the deep roads.
It's kind of like
I'm
the
wondering,
hubris.
Well, the brine they keep mentioning, like they mention it a lot in the story.
Yeah.
That it's even in the rivers and the streams now too. So it's like it's coming up from deep roads. And I'm wondering if that's some sort of liquefied version of the void.
Ooh.
Because they're giving it, like they had to give it to the Wardens. Like they couldn't just touch it. They had to not inject it, consume it.
Yeah.
So it works differently for the Wardens. And in past stories, I think in the past game, I think we've seen that things in terms of infections, it works differently for Wardens. I think even for Red Lyrium too, right? Or am I?
I'm not sure about Red Lyrium.
I don't think they had any like connection to that yet.
I don't think we've had a connection with Red Lyrium and a Warden yet.
No, not that I can remember.
I think that's what I'm doing. But anyway, and also in the mural, which was, I actually really want to see that in game. I'm kind of sad that it's destroyed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's in with lots of little gems. I mean, I would be a tour guide. I'd go down there. I'll see some.
Yeah.
Oh, you're good? What were you going to say?
I was supposed to go, and now we come to the end of the tour. Please jump in the pool and grow some arms.
And get a mutilated head. Or a second arm. Or a third arm, sorry, not a second arm.
Souvenir.
Yeah, souvenir. Yeah, it's just part of the tour. Yeah. It's
souvenir arm.
It's the price of admission.
In terms of that mural, was it not blatantly illustrating for us that they were building an army? I mean, they were making Darkspawn.
Yeah, and the Aravos
So
as well, carrying them forward too. I'm trying to find the
yeah,
exact bit of it. It's
but
quite.
I don't know if they ever say were they also making dwarves into Darkspawn too, or was it just elves?
That's the thing, because they're still dwarven, but it's in the deep roads. And that's the thing. Like, were they dwarves there at one point? There was as they enter the deep roads. That's when all the dwarven stuff was mentioned with the tags and the colours. I remember the gold colour, and then it was once they entered that other sanctum is when it was all elven. So it's like it's in the deep roads and there's that dwarven connection. But were they experimenting, or was it there was no other mention of the dwarves besides once they got further
No,
Oh,
into it?
like here it says on the middle, scenes of healing and succor of disease and injury being drawn forth from the sick and dying by elven mages. So like no specific mention of the victims, just the elven mages.
It kind of
let's
just
see.
reiterates that like the Darkspawn are obviously we know, but they are definitely pre Corypheus, elven in nature, or there's something about that. It just showcases that the Blight is an ancient mystery of the elves, as opposed to it just being Corypheus found it or the makers whatever, or it definitely predates the Veil, given all of this stuff. The thing that
Yeah.
I don't like them, well, I do like, but scares the shit out of me is when Jovis talks about her. Let me find the quote. He just mentions her. And I'm like,
She cannot have it, not again, locked for a reason.
yeah, what the heck? She cannot have it. Yeah, there it is. There it is. Can't get it. Can't let this go. Got to bury me. She cannot have it. Not again. Locked for a reason. Is he talking about himself? Because it says two halves, two wholes. Trying to be ones. I stayed. Me. I hate. It hates that. Not forever. Not for long. Just for now. We waited for you. Oh yes. Now come. Can't let this go. Got to be. Bury me. Bury me. The words even slower. Battling for control. She cannot have it. Not again. Locked for a reason. Who Jovis? Who can't have it? The creature made a gurgling noise, and it took Ramesh's a moment to realise that it was laughing. Ooh. Yeah, it makes me think Gillinan, but I don't know, obviously, because I mean, Gillinan wasn't freed at this point, unless it's just the fact that this ritual is connected to her, or there's some connection. Like when you drink from the Well of Sorrows, and you do see, like, literally Mafal, at least a naked Mafal spirit thing, come from the water and then attack. Well, blast the Alluvian so Corypheus can't get in. Kind of maybe this ritual is similar to that, where it involves a direct connection to her, and maybe that's why he's referring to her, because that's the only connection I can make. But,
Well, he mentions a priestess too. So like the three figures, the supplicant, the queen, and the monster, except the person and the monster change, not a lot but a little, enough to tell, but the priestess remains. Is he referring, I mean, is she referring to the priestess as the queen? Are they the same or are they
yeah,
different? Because if there's a priestess, it could be kind of like a hand of Gillinan
yeah,
that's down there. And is because I imagine
yeah,
Gillinan wasn't it all herself. She probably had, I guess, management
yeah,
to help.
yeah,
So maybe there's a priestess down there that he's
yeah,
referring to. I don't.
yeah. That's the thing. We've only got those carvings to go off of, and yeah, potentially. Yeah, I think that's more realistic, because if Gillinan isn't freed yet, unless there's a ritual that binds them, it sounds like it could have been the person who did it to him, which would I assume be a priestess or someone loyal to her, or as mentioned in that painting, sculpture thing. What is chat saying? Gil seems to me to be the OG broodmother. Ooh. There's in the game screenshots. There are flesh pods. Yes, there are. Yeah, the red lyrium stuff, which we've seen in a few of the stuff, the behind the scenes stuff. I like how does Jovis know who her is? I suspect it's Gillinan, but how Would he know that? Would she speak in his mind after the transformation? It's true. Like again, at the Well of Sorrows, maybe. Who knows though? Gil the Mad Scientist, cruel but intelligent. Like little wonder Solas needed to imprison her. Also true.
I mean, there is a pool, so maybe that's like the Will of Sorrows for Gilliman,
Yeah,
except
exactly.
it's weird
Yeah.
and transforms you.
That's what makes me think that maybe there is that actual binding to her. Two halves become one. That's such a elven thing of their reality being split because of Solas sundering their people. Like sundering potentially their physical and spiritual forms. And this is their way to become one is by connecting them with Darkspawn, and being a disgusting way to become one. But Gilly is brood mommy. It could be the case. Yeah, I do think it's similar to a well. And again, I know I've said it before, but it reminds me of the Executors. It did probably just nothing. It probably is just Gillinan being... She had a relation to creating all of the beasts and animals of the Elven law, but she didn't... Pride stopped her hand of killing loaves of the sea. Pride being Sola, so maybe she just now likes to hang out with the sea creatures, or she has a bigger relation to the sea creatures. And we kind of depict from the mural art we've seen of her, where she's got like seaweed or tendrils coming off her horns. So maybe she just likes the connotation of the sea. But I'd be remiss not to mention the fact that the Executors also speak on behows across the sea, and they were described in Tevinter Nights as like, I can't remember, having a viscous smell, but also like the way they speak is very different too. So I feel like there could be a connection with the Executors, and also Solas finds them dangerous. So maybe there's some connection with the Executors in Gillinan. I think there could be, but we'll find out. For sure.
I mean, it would explain why everything smells like the sea.
It would. It's true. What does chat think about the story? Is there anything in particular anybody has pulled out from this story that they would like us to talk about? I love it. I don't know if it's my favourite. It's definitely the most creepy, and it's fantastic. But I do like the lore of Navara in Dan Among the Dead Men, as well as the drama and Eight Little Talents. But this is definitely one of the top. It's fantastically well written. The dark fantasy elements are so good, and the lore. But yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty lore heavy.
And elven stuff too. And it's connecting again, like we saw in Trespasser with Mafal statues being in the Deep Roads. It's connecting the elves to the Deep Roads and to dwarven bits. Not directly with dwarven lore particularly, like it isn't saying, Mafal killed the Titans or XYZ, but it is saying elves had ruins or elves had sanctuaries in the Deep Roads long before the dwarves. At least that's what's indicated towards. And this place was immaculate too. It hadn't been ransacked. It hadn't been, torn away by the Darkspawn. It sounded like it was described to be very immaculate.
It sounds like it was preserved somehow.
Yeah, which
Because
is...
it was decaying, like it should be, like everything else was.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's some magic there that's keeping it
And
up and running.
And if that's the case, how did Ramesh and them get in if it was preserved? Or then it would have been the other wardens, or then it would have been the creatures maybe escaping. Who knows? I'm sure there would have been some indicator in this.
Did it say why? Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. No, you go.
Did it say why the other wardens were the party that went there in the first place? Why they went?
Actually, doesn't know.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Because Ramesh is going for a search party, but it doesn't say why they went in the first place. Something here they don't like. I mean, the horses getting annoyed.
Maybe because I imagine, the Darkspawn appear to be just constantly being produced down there, so maybe they got some reports of, hey, there's, Hurlocks with two additional arms running around somewhere in Navara.
I found it. Ostensibly to carry out the living, but more practically so you could kill whatever the previous group had not managed to kill.
Yeah, but that's just general warden.
That's just general warden stuff. On a rescue mission, you always took more ones than you had lost. Yeah, okay, yeah. You're right. Yeah,
Like
those
the
rules have been written. Yeah,
specific
you're
purpose
right.
why they went there in like the middle of the Navaran hills isn't revealed. But I imagine it's because they got reports of strange darkspawn and went to investigate.
Yeah, it'd probably been. Yeah. Yeah, it'd have been cool if we knew their original. We're half a day from mining. Jovis's mining expedition.
Hmm.
Okay, so they were
Huh?
going on some kind of mining expedition. But until we get there, we won't know. And if we're fine, we'll turn back until now. Da, da, da. So yeah, we found a reason, but not the reason. It's also set in Navarra too, which is cool. The Navaran forest. We don't know whereabouts, but yeah, I like that aspect. It's like, obviously, it's not overtly obvious because it's underground anyway. But yeah, Hormak is set below the depths of Navarra forest. Answered in the game. Most likely true. Because I missed the
I'd be
first
really
three.
mad if they just keep like if they just explain everything except that one. I'll be really mad.
So why was Jovis going out there in the first place? Oh, you know.
Just stuff.
Yeah. That's a good.
Reasons.
I think that's a good sign of a good story, though, Amber. If it leaves you with more questions and answers, but like, it's not like, oh, okay. It's like, oh, like, as opposed to, oh, okay. Like this one, like Mass Effect Andromeda, where it's like, who's the benefactor? We don't know because we didn't write that part. Where the Canary? Well, we didn't get to that part because we didn't get to do that DLC. Who's this? What's going on with that? Who's Cora Harper? Is she really Lucifer's dad? Well, we don't know. Like, this is like, oh, what's going on with the other Tigers? Why is it Elven in nature? What's going on with Gillinan? Are the executives connected to this? While also giving you a lot of substance too.
And then
And
they'll
that
be
is-
like, nah, let's not answer that.
I mean, the fact that there's 11 more,
Yeah.
or there's 12 in total. Well,
Yeah.
now just 11. That one was obliterated. But I wonder
was
where if it shows, because it wasn't it on a mural showing like 11 mountains or something.
Yeah.
So I wonder
Yeah.
if it indicates where we are in Thetis.
How
Loosely.
many continents are there in Thetis? How many countries? 1, 2. Well, we can't do 1, 2, 3. No, I can't do that. I was going to try and count and see if there would be one pair, but we don't. That's just, yeah. I wonder why that specific number. It might just be because. I was going to say initially maybe it's each of the Evanurus, but no, because that would exceed them.
But what about the Forbidden or Forgotten ones?
Yeah, also true. Also true. Or are they just pools that Gillinan created when she was making all monsters back in Yield Day, and that's what she did to prove herself to get godhood? Who knows?
Maybe.
You know, it could have been something like that.
I wonder if it's in relation to. This is a really, really far stretch,
Go for it.
but I wonder if it's in relation to where the Titans are.
Yeah, I mean they did mention like the fist of like the earth moved like the fist of an angry titan. It wasn't capitalized, but even referencing that made me like, okay. And I mean deep roads too, so they are in the deep roads, and it did say something. There was a mention of it's not like Kalsharok or it's Ozma. They said, I can't remember what they said. I'll find it.
I mean, perhaps they were using such, I guess, horrible methods to create the army to defeat Titans. I mean, I'm just thinking.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
If they're already underground, and what they're seeking is underground, it wouldn't surprise me that Gillinan would position her monster factories in relation to certain Titans were, so they could eventually just go at it and take their power.
Yeah.
It might
So-
not even be that. It might also be that it just requires insane amounts of lyrium, given that there is like this large lyrium crystal in the ceiling, which apparently powers the whole thing, probably. So that might also be why
Also true.
they
Yeah.
might choose like a Titan spot.
Oh man.
I mean, yeah, mountains as well, though. If you do think if they... I mean, if this one was particularly on a mountain, does it say if the other ones were in mountains? The mountain that brought thousands of rocks, where the Aravals brought their prey. They had been 11. Were there 11 mountains or just 11 ruins? Oh, 11. I'd have to go look at the mural thing again. Because if it's mountains, that definitely could be a Titan.
I mean, it does here the mountain he brought down, blah blah, was not the only one to which the Aravals brought their prey.
Yeah, so it could be. Yeah, it could be related to a Titan for sure. Or it could just be where you need to mine lyrium in order to get the power, as Lucas said. Or it could be
True. It did say he was going on a mining expedition.
Yeah.
There's him there.
I suppose that does tie it together, actually. It's a mountain mining expedition, lyrium. When I read it initially, I thought that when it mentions the colour in the chamber of the lyrium, I thought, oh, we've got green lyrium and yellow lyrium. But no, it's the chamber has that colour. I was like, oh, okay, never mind. No yellow lyrium. I'll have to find the exact quote. What the lyrium. People saying that they don't want the 11 other tags, whatever you want to call them, mountains to be fetch quests in the game. I agree.
Oh God.
The real question is, if there's 11 other mountains, will there be 11 other worm things?
Yeah, what creatures? Spider with hands would be one of them.
Probably, yeah.
And then what else are you going to have? Oh. Yeah, it'll be a waste of a cool concept to do that. I agree to that.
Bells and geeks.
Bells and geeks. Any other hot takes from this story? I think it just really, for me, paints a picture of we were talking about this before, but what the Darkspawn are going to look like in the next game, because John Epler tweeted this morning or before. I'll get the tweet up. Oh, sorry, not tweet, Discord. It was in the Discord. Somebody said the Darkspawn looks very different in Veilguard. It's it's not a simple redesign like the demons. Or is it? Is it? And then John Epler just replied, I'm not going to tell you what it is that's making them look different, since that's a spoiler, but it's more than just a visual redesign. And obviously, as we've just read in this entire story, all the Darkspawn here are all, what's the word? Demonstrified. What's the word?
You mean humanoid?
Yeah, like, well, a few of them were humanoidy and some of them were... There was a word that I couldn't say before as well. And I can't remember it.
Which one of the many?
Oh, funny. They're all, like, manipulated and gross and, you know...
Oh. Hello, cat. Hello. Hello.
You have to show a picture of your cat if you say hello, cat.
Ow. Ow. Ow.
You have to send a picture of your cat when you say that.
Wait, hold on. Let me see. Do I have
Let
one?
me try and find this word while you do that. Corrupted, twisted. Oh, yeah, twisted will do. Twisted, grotescus, grotesqueries. Yeah, that's the word. Grotesque.
Grotesqueries, yeah.
Yeah, grotesqueries. They're all grotesque and gross, and yeah. So the redesign comes from, we assume, from the fact that they've gone through this pool that has come from Gillinan, and they've been twisted. Also, as Lucas did say before as well, Red Lyrium too. So we've got Red Lyrium Darkspawn in the Veilguard, as we've seen in concept art, and also just largely what's going on with the game and the state of Red Lyrium. But now we've also got these grotesque Darkspawn twisted creatures. So I do wonder how much of a plotline it's going to have of the Darkspawn are getting more grotesque because we have to stop them by...
Also, there you go.
Ah, I'll show. What is the ginger one called?
The ginger one is Bingo.
And then the other one is called
Ellie.
Oh, look at the toe beans.
They look so happy, so content.
Yeah, Bingo's quite fat.
Oh, which is your favorite?
Say again.
Oh, how much do they weigh? If you don't mind.
Bingo is like, I think a hour and a half or something. So not fat, but a bit chubby.
Well, try 20
Jeez.
Chat does like
for a
them.
cat.
Have you got a cat, Emily?
I have two.
Have you
They are
got
massively overweight.
Hello,
I mean,
Ellie. Hello.
I don't have
Hello.
them with me. I made sure they were not here for the read because when I read out loud, they yowl.
Oh, do they?
Oh, God. It's very confusing. So I was like, no, we're not doing. See if I can find a picture of one of them. But Romeo is the one that weighs 20 pounds, and the vet fat shames him every time he goes in.
Oh no.
But he's like, he's massively obese. You have to do something. He's like, I am doing something. It's not working.
Yeah, but the trouble with like cats or like losing weight for cats is that you can't do it too fast, otherwise they get liver damage.
Oh.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I did
because
not know that.
no, you have to gradually reduce the weight because if they lose weight too fast, like the way they digest food has something to do with it, and then like if they don't have enough protein, it can damage their livers.
Oh.
That's good
Oh,
to know. They're on food, so.
I mean, if it's like if you know it's a diet plan or something from your vet, then it should work. And as long as you like, it's just the extreme case. In like some people, you know, don't give them food for a day or something, and that's not healthy.
Okay. They just can't do extreme weight loss. I get
No. If you like, if they get food every day, then it's fine.
Just
it. Alright, I'm
slower.
trying to
Less extreme
Yeah,
weight loss.
just less food.
So I'm gonna have to upload it through my phone. I literally have two computers and a phone all working together right now. State
What-
of things.
Which one's this one? Ah.
It's Romeo.
This is Romeo. Oh.
Yes, the fat one.
Look, I'm gonna look at his toe beans. Look at his toe beans.
Trying to find Rosie. She's less. She's not
Oh
as.
my god, that is a
charismatic.
fat cat.
He's so fat. He sits like an old man. Like I mean, it's
I
sad.
mean, so does mine, but you know.
But I've been through so many weight loss, not programs, but just kind of like doing it on my own, making sure his food is restricted, yada yada, and it doesn't matter. He doesn't get treats. He's just fat. It's just his state of being.
Just absorbs matter from around him.
He absorbs matter.
Let's see if I can find a picture of Rosie recently. She's not as bad. I think she weighs, well, she's 15 pounds, I think, but it's not. It's better, but not by much.
So Rosie and Romeo.
Yes,
Oh,
I have an
that's
R
cute.
theme going. Yeah, she's farther down, but anyway, I do think it's interesting in term, not to just jump back to the story, that they picked a warden that was, I guess, further along in his service, because I think he said, what was he, 23 years in?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do have the specific statistics of that. Actually, I'll find out what.
Yeah. So does that mean he's nearing the end?
Yeah, he's nearing his calling. Because he did say
Yeah.
something about. Oh, they did say that they heard something, but that was unusual for Lesha because she was younger.
Yeah, like he said, I think it was explained that he heard something and he thought it was the calling, but she heard it as well, so it
Yeah.
wasn't the calling.
I think I may have accidentally taken that out of context one day and said he's on the calling. I'll find out. He's a senior grade warden. He's been with the order for over 23 years. With his older age, his calling is almost upon him. So yeah, I didn't say that. Yeah, good.
The question is like, is there like a set time, like a set number of years when the calling
Is it
gets
like
you then? Or
40, 50, 60? I don't know, actually. I've always assumed 40, 50.
I mean, How old do people get in Thedas? That would be a good question.
That's also a good question. Who's the oldest person in Thedas besides Xenon, the Black Empire?
Antiquarian, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there's Rosie. Let's have a look. I'm going to show everybody there. Ah. No toe beans to zoom in on though.
Filthy
Oh.
pervert.
Romeo's definitely judging me for looking at his toe beans. He's like, stop it.
Yeah, he's
But he does
He
make a
actually-
good loaf.
he is a very, yes, he would feed a lot of families.
Wait, speaking of, I also have one more picture of Ellie as a loaf.
We'll take all the cat
She,
pics.
she
We'll
just she just lost her legs. She looks like a war veteran.
Oh. Well, thank you for your service.
I like her little nose, little dot.
Yeah, she has a boob spot.
Boop, yeah. A very boop spot. Toe beans. No, I can't see them. I can zoom in on your fabric though. That camera quality is lovely. You can see that depth of field. Anyway, back to the story. What was I saying? Yeah, Ramesh, he's 23, in the service. So Hormak was encased in a dwarven rune. So the tag, well, the at least the entrance was definitely dwarven, and then that's where it gets elven after that. So it's as if for some reason the elven parts of it were unearthed, kept sacred, kept safe somehow, like we mentioned before. How did that happen? And then the dwarves have just kind of populated other aspects of it and tied it to the deep roads, or at least there's a connection to the deep roads. And then that's where it's filled with. There's also this viscous grey fluid. Now, is the viscous grey fluid the same as the fluid in the pool?
Think so.
Yeah, it makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, they put them in the pool, they swallow that viscous fluid up, and that's why we saw Frengel, or Frenka, whatever she was called, where they'd opened her mouth and loads of fluid came out. And that's because she'd been drowned in the pool, or she had, at least not drowned in it, but she'd been put into it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Take a little swim.
Yeah, take a little dive. Nice hot tub break.
I mean, like, given that the pool seems to change creatures at random, you
Yeah.
know, with like a Hurlock getting a Drake's body, what would happen if a Hurlock stepped into there and he kept his head, but the entire rest of his body was that of a fish? Would he just flop around in the pool?
It's a good question.
I mean,
Ask
that would
hard-hitting questions.
that would be the least threatening thing to ever appear there.
It would. Well,
I
it
mean,
would be.
She also wanted to dominate the seas. I mean, if she was going to go after people on ships,
Good point. Yeah.
because isn't there a reference to something coming from the beyond the sea, like the exequaturs, and then
Yeah.
there's also Kunari, but we're not even sure about their origin and
That
how they could relate.
reminds me. Speaking of the executives, that reminds me of something. Wait, hold on a second. Yada 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 yada.
And where the humans came from too.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something in the sea we don't know about yet.
That's the thing, because there could even be a titan in the sea for all we know too.
Ooh, a sea titan.
Yeah.
You know, maybe Gillian was just a beach girl.
Just having hot girl summer at the beach.
Yeah, I'll kill some of
drinking
Andrul.
Darkspawn.
Yeah, with Andrul.
In
There's-
a little beach cottage.
Yeah. And then they're like, oh yeah, I suppose you can have godhood.
Let me see, do I have that?
I'll let you do your point first, because my point moves on to something else.
I have to see if I can find the point I made I remember something from a video of mine about the executors, about some story of someone in a cave, but I need to find out where it was. I think it was in World of Thedas. It would be easier if my video loads. Thank you very much.
Gil Summer. I always gravitate to grabbing my clown nose because I have it right next to me and it's always far away, but I always just end up just subconsciously fiddling with it. So I apologize to everyone in the chat. I've been playing with this for like an hour. It's because when you pull it, it's actually a Rudolph nose. So when you pull it, it lights up. Anyway.
Nice.
Was it regarding the executors, did you say, Lucas?
Yeah, it was. But I can't for the life of me find it. Wait, somewhere here?
Sasha said, for the calling, the upper end is around 30 years after the calling, but it can take less. It can be less time. The length of time depends on the willpower of the individual warden. Thank you, Sasha. Appreciate that. Okay, that kind of... Oh, brilliant. So it just depends per warden then. Oh, DeCaster, which sentence out of context is wild? I completely forgot. Already. You have to type it out for me so I can see it.
Okay, I have a really hard-hitting question.
I'll go for it.
If Gillenon was a Taylor Swift song, which one would she be?
Oh, give me an hour to answer that question. Ooh. Oh, we don't know much about her, but power. So C. So giving me Evermore and Folklore vibes because she did create creatures and she did. We do paint her originally as nice. Now we know now she isn't nice. She may have been nice at one point. Right. This requires more research. Beach Girl.
While looking at this for the executors, by the way, right now I found some old posts on the Bioware social network, and someone there straight up stole my thumbnail from the video.
Did they? Did they?
Yeah, they did.
Oh, what are you going to do about that, Lucas?
I mean, it's post from, when was it? 2020, so not much.
Alright, I need to look at some Taylor Swift beach songs. While you do your executor thing, I'm going to do some hardcore research, okay?
But I'm doing the same. Just talk amongst yourselves, I guess.
If
There you go, Emily.
if we're just allowed open space, if we're thinking about the executors, the fact that they come from across the sea, and if we are tying them together with Gillenon in theory, would that also imply that maybe one of those monster factories is also across the sea?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. It could imply that there are loads of monster factories. Yeah, absolutely. It could even be where she originally, like the actual original monster factory is. That's a better way to call them, monster factory. If they come from the sea, it's like that's the OG. But also, what's the difference if they come from the sea versus maybe they are saying that literally in terms of they come from the pools. So maybe it doesn't actually mean they come from somewhere outside of Thedas, like west of Ravine or whatever, no, east of Ravine or whatever. Maybe it means that they actually come from a pool. But also it could mean that they come from literally a pool beyond the sea. If we take it extra literally. But it definitely could imply that there are multiple and across the sea. I think the biggest connection is, and I will get some artwork to prove my point if I have it. The original, at least a concept for the Dragon Age Inquisition Sentinel Elves was a Sentinel Elf in gold, and they had horns, and that was an original concept art for an ancient elf who was a Sentinel. And then we saw the archer in the Dragon Age Game Awards trailer who was in some dark forest and they had horns, and that still is absolutely unanswered. I'll see if I can find the artwork. And that for me was like, right, that a horned elf originally represents a concept art for a Sentinel elf, which is an elven which is related to an elven god, and also an ancient elf. And now we have this horned figure who has a bow made of triangles walking through a forest. Is that now an ancient elven cult of Gillinan that are the executors? And that's where one of my original thoughts came from. I'll try and find the bits of art that link to it. I did that video ages ago though, so it might be a while. And then other bits have been the fact that Strife and Irulen, they go back to a Dalish clan, but it has ties to Gillinan. The floating triangle thing still has me completely, like, it's a complete enigma. The fact that we have the Veil Jumpers that are this new faction, but they still have the same triangle iconography as the Executors. The Executors speak on behalf of powers across the sea, and they have a completely different presence. So this archer has this horn, as chat can see. Why does it have a horn? Is it a part of the headgear? It has. Now we know it's a Veil Jumper, we assume, but still, floating triangles. Floating triangles. What is the crack? And then this figure, floating triangles. They're also using it as a spell. Gold, it represents ancient Alafan. We know that even more so now when you look at the Alafan forest in the actual what's it called, gameplay footage, when we see the Solace Ritual and we see this is actually in the Alafan forest. At the same time though, the Alafan forest is also home to the Veil Jumpers, so there's lots of connections to the Executors in Gillinan. All of it, unfortunately though, is based on concept art, so they may have pivoted, they may have changed that around, they may have just made it the Veil Jumpers, I don't know. But yeah, that oceanic thing is definitely one of the biggest things. The fact that there's a pool, smells of the ocean, and then we have an entire faction who literally speak on behalf of powers across the sea.
I wonder if it's also possible there could be, I mean, I don't know how far the deep roads actually go. We do have the DLC, The Descent, where we go pretty deep.
Yeah.
But do you think it's possible there are deep roads under the sea?
Under the sea. Yeah. Potentially. Yeah, I mean, I think yeah. I'd be really cool to see. That's the thing, there's so much of the deep roads that we haven't even seen yet because we're so used to just Southern Thedas. It would be cool to see the actual other aspects of the deep roads. I reckon it definitely could be a possibility, for sure. I mean, where's Kalshrutton? Where's Ozma? Do all the deep roads connect to each other? They all do, don't they?
I think.
Yeah, I think they
I mean-
do. I think that was said somewhere.
So how would Ozma connect to Kalshruk? Would it be through the sea? It wouldn't go over ground, would it? So it would have to go through the sea in some regard, wouldn't it?
If it went
Potentially.
under it, like
Yeah.
a tunnel.
Yeah, unless it went to the tunnel. Yeah. Ooh, DeCaster sent me some art. It's not that one particularly, but it does prove the point of there being elven gods with, ancient elves with horns. That is one point to prove it though. It's not that particular art, but that is definitely one. Thank you for sending that. It just shows.
I'll be right back.
Anyways, it shows a sentinel elf with horns, and now we see. I'll just post it in here. We've got this dude with horns, and then we had this figure back in the day with also horns. And it's like, why do the ancient elves have horns as an original concept? And then we have, let me find it, this figure also with horns. So it's just interesting. The other thing that I did note about the story is Jovis did say they made the wardens drink. So it's again referring to what you said before, Emily, about the priestess. So I do think maybe that wouldn't have been Gillinan. That would have been like the group of people who made them drink, because it wouldn't have been the Darkspawn unless they were intelligent Darkspawn. It would have been a Darkspawn. So I think it could have been that priestess that's gone, you will drink from this, and it's so then they can't let her have it again, which is ominous. But I think that could have been this kind of priest
Well, what's interesting is
thingy.
priestess never shows herself, so if there is something still there, it doesn't ever come up and say hi.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering now is, because they are wardens, if somehow they were mentally influenced to drink or compelled
Yeah. Yeah.
versus a physical being there forcing them to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's the thing. It's
Perhaps
so ominous, but in a great way. But yeah.
through their calling, perhaps? I don't know. I mean, I know
Yeah.
that it's that Mythal. What is the quote? It's Mythal is the calling or something.
Yeah.
She,
Mafal speaks the calling. Yeah. Yeah, which is translated backwards in the No Sorrows.
and like we know that wardens can be controlled. I mean, like even with Corypheus and things
Yeah.
like that, they can be. So it wouldn't be surprising if they were compelled to drink rather than their own
Yeah.
actual.
That's cool. Yeah, like they actually felt that compelling. And if like the blight comes from the elven gods anyway, they created it as a weapon against the Titans, whatever, there'd be some way that they can control him even more. So that's why I think in the next game, the Grey Wardens, and this is an opinion, complete opinion, I think the Grey Wardens are going to be absolutely wrecked again. I think the elven gods are going to be creating their army of Darkspawn, which they're already doing in Horror of Hormak. But I also think they're going to use another factor of the Taint or the Blight, and that is going to be the Grey Wardens. So I think that they're going to have an army of Darkspawn, but as well, I think they're going to have an army of Grey Wardens. If they are blighted gods and they are blighting the world and they can control the Blight or the Taint in some capacity, and they've got an army of Darkspawn, surely that means they're going to then be like, oh yeah, well, guess who else has the Taint inside their blood? Oh, it's the Grey Wardens. Right, okay, here we go. Let's have an army of Grey Wardens as well. To some capacity. That sounds so vague because, like, how can Davrin control it? How can characters like this that we're going to experience? So there needs to be some kind of way where, like, maybe I don't know how, but I think there's going to be some level of corruption, and that's also based on fair dues. There was a leak about Weishaupt being attacked with a red lyrium dragon and Darkspawn, but also the concept art we've had of Weishaupt, the rumors of Weishaupt. Let me get this one particular concept art of Weishaupt. And also the Thetis Calls teaser was like, I won't stand. I can't remember what the exact quote was, but it was, I won't let wardens run tail, and I can't remember. He won't let his fellow wardens run. They'll have to fight basically. So the wardens are being under attack. Corrupted Asan, no. Maybe Warden's in their calling. Ooh, maybe Warden's actually in their calling. I don't know, but that might be a small number. But yeah, let me find this concept art from ages ago. Again, I know it's concept art, but it does showcase Weishaupt under attack. And again, it showcases what I think to be Weishaupt under attack with a very weird green tint. It's definitely a Warden, I can tell you that. I'll post it in the Discord as well. It's just interesting of what's going on. But yeah, I think bad news for the Grey Wardens. We already know so in any way, because one of the missions, literally, spoilers, based on a leak, that may not be true. But we already know based on a leak, that may or may not be true, that Weishaupt's going to be under attack. I think that attack is going to be far worse than we think, and I think the Grey Wardens are going to get absolutely screwed.
Thanks, Hawk.
In terms of the concept art, it just looks like a massive breach is being opened.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. Which I think elven gods were like the same kind of thingy though as when Solas was pulled back in, or when the elven gods escaped. It's that same kind of thing, I think. So
Yeah.
maybe they just spawn there and go, right, we're having you. I don't know. I won't ask good men to turn tail and run. Thank you to Caster. That's the one. That's the line. So yeah, I think the nature of the Grey Ones, in terms of the blighted gods building their army, it makes sense. Any other final thoughts on the horror of Hormak from chat or from Lucas or Emily?
No, not really.
I will say one noticeable thing. It's very small, but perhaps this is just Ramesh and Lesha's interpretation, but when they say stately elven kings and queens,
Yes.
so I'm wondering if they're perceiving them as kings and queens based on what they know from their own culture,
Ooh.
since
Yeah.
it's actually depicting gods, or if they actually were anointed kings and queens. I mean, I think Solus does say something in Trespasser, which he depicts
First
they were generals and then
generals
kings and
and
queens.
yeah, he
gods.
says first generals and elders. No, what does he say? He says he says the sequence, doesn't he? It's like first.
So
Yeah.
it also makes me wonder if when they said that they were drawing in the sick and dying and they were healing them, I'm starting to wonder if they were creating the disease and also the cure,
Oh yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they would have people come to them for help, and then they would have their victims. They would pluck their victims willingly from the Aravels. So
So they can
just my
heal.
2 cents.
Yeah, that's a good. No, that's a good. That yeah, you got the scenes of healing and succor of disease and injury being drawn from the sick and dying by elven mages. So it's then you've got the one. Yeah. Because what do
And
they
they're putting
say?
it back.
They say that the Aravels brought their prey.
So they were going from what, town to town, this civilization to civilization. I'm guessing promising cures. It
Yeah.
sounds like there was almost a type of propaganda going on, unless they were just abducting people.
And then we assume poisoning them to build them an army. So the question is,
Yes.
how long? I think the question now is, did it just recently start again in Thedas? Has it always been that way, and the tomb has just been separated for so? Oh, it's been so preserved for so long. Why now? Obviously, Gilliland's been free now in the context of the Dragon Age lore right now. But when Horror of Hormak, at least we don't know the timing of this story. So maybe the timing is after. I don't know. Maybe it's current. Maybe it's just before. Maybe it's I don't know. But like, what has
Oh,
been the
God.
trigger? What was that?
I found it, by the way.
Did you? What did you find? Oh, go for it.
Yeah, from like the word of Thedas, it's
Hey.
across the Eastern Ocean, which would kind of fit. There's like these stories about all sorts of people going across the Eastern Ocean to some island, and all it says here all such tales end the same, with the expeditions never being heard from again. One tells of a marcher lord's valiant wife commandeering a vessel to cross the sea, in search of her lost husband, only to find his settlement mysteriously abandoned and a lone survivor so crazed with terror that he killed himself rather than being taken from the cave.
Oh
Which is
shit!
kind of in tune with
It is. It's what's
Warden
she?
Recruit.
Yeah, what was she called?
Friedel.
Yeah, because she literally did that. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, flipping heck.
Oh, I
So
think we found.
might be that, yeah, she is across the sea to the east.
That's a good connection. Oh my goodness, that's a good
I
connection.
knew there was something.
Yeah, look at that. Oh, that's a brilliant connection. And it again ties to the executives again. So, Fellskin Keeks, whatever you're called. You can say that leak thing. I've already mentioned it, so you can say it. I don't mind you saying it. DeCasta said, after the war ended, generals became elders, and then the kings, then gods, then the Eveners. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was it. That was it. Good and evil, right and wrong. Chains of command. Brilliant, cool. I think with that we will wrap up this session of JACKDAUDIBLE'S ROOK CLUB. I really appreciate Lucas and Emily for coming on to join me for this one. Really, really appreciate both of you doing the masculine and feminine voices. It means a lot. And I appreciate a good conversation, discussion as well. Do any of you have anything to plug, anything to say, anything you want to shout out if anybody wants to? I don't know. I know for Lucas, you've got a channel. Anything you want to plug or anything like that?
I mean, pretty much the same as last time. I'm still working on that, trying to find some time, which is difficult given that I'm alone at work for the next 2.5 weeks or so.
Yeah. I mean, we're still waiting for that release date for the Veilguard anyway, which we're getting this month.
Yeah.
And as Bioware have tweeted in the past 2 hours, I don't think they have. So hopefully we'll get that. Well, we're going to get it this month. Bioware. Where? I'll have Lucas's channel in the description down below as well if you want to check out his content. Emily, again, thank you so much for joining. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. I was really, really excited to read and be here. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties I had earlier.
Do not worry about it.
My reliable computer, the one I count on, decided to show a different side of itself to me today.
Well, I believe you will be joining me for the what's it called? The Sidonia one. What's it called?
Murder by Death Mages?
Murder by Death Mages. Yes, you will be Sidonia herself.
I will, and my voice will be in a hopefully better condition by then.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. What's next week is callback, folks. So yeah, we'll be doing callback next week. I can't remember callback. That's the Skyhold one. But yeah, again, appreciate you all coming and joining and listening to us read. Emily, you were so great to cast the says. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. But yeah, I'll see you all next week. Again, appreciate you all joining and watching us.